Hey guys, Jason here at Drum Percussion Studio, and I just want to take a little extra time to break down a little bit of what we've been learning in class about scales. So I'm going to teach you a little formula that we've gone over in class. There's a lot of different ways to figure out your scales, so this is just one of them. The first thing is we need to know the difference between a whole step and a half step. So I'll show you right here on the marimba. So right here, as I go from note to note, these are what we call half steps. Another word for that is chromatic. So you may have heard of the chromatic scale. So when we go from one note to the very next possible note, that is a half step. And of course we know that two halves make a whole. So if I go from F to F sharp, that's a half step. From F sharp to G, that's another half step. So if I put it together and I move from F to G, that would be what we call a whole step. And a way that you can also check is that if you have a whole step, in the middle you will always have a half step. So from F to G is a whole step. We've got our F sharp in the middle. But from F to F sharp is a half step, and from F sharp to G is a half step. Give you another example. If we're on A and I go up a half step, that's going to take me to A sharp. But if I go up a whole step, that's going to take me to B. So A to B is a whole step, but A to A sharp is a half step, and B flat to B, or A sharp to B in this case, is a half step. A couple places you need to be careful. If you notice right here, these two notes are adjacent. The E and the F are touching, or they're right next to each other. They are the next possible note, up or down, so that is a half step. There's nothing in between. So E to F is a half step. Another example is right here. We've got B and C. So that's a half step. If we're on B and we want to go up a whole step, well, we have to add another half to it. And so that's going to take us not to C, but to C sharp. So B to C sharp is a whole step. And right there in the middle, B to C would be a half step. So that's the difference between whole steps and half steps. So when we're making scales, we have a formula. And that's the reason that all of our scales have the same basic sound, is because they're based on the same formula. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take one note, could be any note you want, that's your starting note. And from there, we're going to go up a series of whole steps and half steps. So I'm going to show you right here, I've got it written down. So there's my W is my symbol for whole step. That lowercase h tells us half step. So if you look right here, I wrote out the C scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And you'll notice that from C to D, I've listed that as a whole step. D to E, whole step. E to F is a half step. F to G, another whole gets us to A, another whole gets us to B, and finally our last half step takes us to C. So your first and last note are the same. Now I'm going to show you that on the keyboard in just a second. But that's the pattern that we're going to use. I wrote it out here. Sometimes it's easier to remember this way. You take your starting note, whatever note you want, and you're going to go up 2 whole steps, a half step, 3 whole steps, and finally you finish with a half step, and if you've done it correctly, it should be the same note that you started with. So I'll show you on the keyboard right now. Let's take the C scale, for example. So we find our C. So we have our C. We go up a whole step. That's going to take us to D. Another whole step takes us to E. Then we say we need a half step. Well, there it is. There's the F. We go up another whole step to G. Another whole step to A. Another whole step to B. And we finish off with a half step that gets us 1 octave higher than when we started. So I've got the first note and the last note both as C. So I put it together. And I can go back down. So you can apply that same formula to any scale. So you just start with your starting note, whatever you want it to be. Go up 2 whole steps, then you do a half step. Go up 3 whole steps, finish with a half step, and you should be on the same note, 1 octave higher than what you started with. That's how you make a scale. See you next time.